Well, started tearing apart this F-100, getting the whole front fenders, inner fender wells, front radiator core support, all that stuff off. And of course, when you start tearing these things apart, some of its life history starts telling you that it may have had a bump or two in the past. In this case, you can see the frame is got a little kink in it right here. So it probably had some form of front end collision at some point, and it did bend the frame. And it bent the frame this way. You can see, I don't know if you can tell in the picture, but it's basically off probably almost an inch. So back on the F-100 project finally, after a bunch of home projects. So as you can see, I have no lift, just me. So can you work on something like this at home and separate everything? Yes. Is it fun? No. But some blocks, some hydraulic jacks, I jacked up the cab and the bed, put them on blocks, used some nice long sketchy poles to hold it off the frame so I could roll the frame out. Rolled the frame out, and I've already started taking most of the front suspension off, so just wanted to give you kind of a little update of what I did as a complete tear down. Tore down the entire front clip, got everything separated from the cab, so it's now all sitting over here in different piles. Some notes. There's some bolts for the front fender. I had to actually do a hole saw and cut it out because there's clips on the fender that capture the nuts, and those clips rust out, the nuts freeze on the bolt, you try to turn it and it spins off, so basically there's no way to get that bolt undone. So I basically just hole sawed where the bolt was on. I figured I'll fill that with some weld and put another nut on. But these two are actually probably this one and this hidden one here were two of the hardest ones to get off. Everything else was okay, even though it was pretty well rusted, and hopefully putting it back together will work a lot better. But it came apart pretty good. And the plan is I'm going to make a little cart so I can lower this cab back onto a cart with some wheels so I can move it around, and then the bed of the truck is going to be worked on much later. So first order of business is get this cab going. I get the frame done, and see it's completely stripped down, which is nice. I've already done some of the basic stuff. I didn't want to unnecessarily cover it because it's pretty much disassembly, cutting things off. I wasn't planning on saving any of the front suspension, so I used a Sawzall cut-off disc and just cut everything off that wouldn't break off. And now I'm ready for getting the tough part out, which is this guy and these transmission mounts. That will be today, and I'm going to use a plasma cutter. I believe that'll be the simplest way to do it. If you don't have one, borrow one, rent one, but I think the plasma cutters seem to work well. We'll see, I guess. Don't want to predetermine. I was also able to straighten the frame members here, so I'm going to keep the original F-100 frame instead of grafting on the Crown Vic frame, so this way it'll still be a mostly classic truck. Yeah, I was able to straighten these frame rails pretty darn nice, so we're back in business with the stock chassis. The only thing holding these two frame rails even mildly square is this giant cross member. So once we start cutting and removing that thing, this front frame rail will probably want to wander around, and then especially if we start welding on anything, it's going to be twisting this thing all over the place. So what you have to do is you've got to shore up the front. Some people have welded a piece across. Gateway Mustang, which has a really good video on putting the Crown Vic front suspension on a F-100 frame, just took a piece of metal and made a jig that bolts to the bumper mounts, so that they just unbolt it when they're all said and done, which looked to me like the best way to go, so you don't have to cut welds off later, and you don't have anything welded that gets in the way. So once you get that Crown Vic front end bolted in, then that kind of holds the frame pretty much square and all together, and then you can unbolt this front piece and bring the motor in and everything else. So Luckily, if you do enough metal work and fab stuff, you tend to have something laying around the shop. I had this nice piece of angle iron that should do the trick. You could use pretty much anything, 2 pieces of metal, however you want to do it, and don't necessarily even have to have a welder for it. But in my case, it's not quite the perfect size, so I got to weld some nuts on to make this thing work. But the next step here is get the front shored up so I can start cutting off the pieces. There we go. This piece of angle iron bolted on 2 places, welded a couple nuts on since that didn't go far enough, and now this is going to be removable and I'm done chopping all this stuff out of here. So, progress. This side is, at least this is the transmission cross member. What I found is the best way to get this baby off is cut the metal away so you can get to the rivets that are holding on this lower bracket. And any of these rivets, you've got a large head and a small head on the other side. What I'm noticing is if you get the small head off, it's easier to pound them out, but depending on what direction you have to go, it probably doesn't matter too much. So best thing, instead of a grinder disc, flap discs. I've been doing a lot of metal work, and like a 40 grit flap disc works significantly better than any of those standard grinding discs. It just removes a lot more material, is more flexible, works a lot better. It takes those heads off pretty darn quick and easy. Once you've got the head off, then a nice air hammer with a blunt tip on it, just hammer it down and it actually pops the rivets almost right out of the system. I mean, boom, pops them right out the other side, loosens them up so you can pound the rest of the metal out. Pounding with a hammer, chisel, didn't seem to work too well, but air hammer has a nice little cadence to it, so it seems to really pop those things out much better. So grind the heads off once you can get to them, pop them out, and then take a giant hammer and bang the rest of it away. So anyway, that's at least some progress. Frame's all cleaned up. About a 6-hour process. Quite a bit of fun. Not really. Hoping that's kind of the most, the worst part. That is supposedly the worst part of doing a Crown Vic front swap, is getting all that stuff cut out. And I have to admit, it was not fun. Highly recommend a plasma cutter or a torch, because even the rivets, grinding them flat, wouldn't pound out without blasting them with the plasma cutter a little bit. Then I had to pound them. And there's so much layers you got to go through too. It's much easier with a plasma cutter than a cutoff disc. I don't think you'd even be able to get into most of the spots with a cutoff disc. So it was a challenge, but it is possible, and it does clean up really nice. And I kind of also, since I'm still outside, got all the rust off the part of the frame that I'm going to have to work on next. So next part of this process, I'm moving into the garage and get the Crown Vic front subframe all cleaned up, and then start mocking things up. Cannot say enough positive things about Gateway Mustangs kit. Takes all the guesswork completely out. I know I've skipped ahead a bit, but got everything back in. But you follow their instructions. This pre-welded box plate, you tape, measure, cut where they say to cut, and that thing just goes right in. Marked the bottom, drilled the 1 1/4 inch holes like they said, pulled this whole front structure out, drilled the holes, set the box in, cut the steel. Probably could have done a cleaner job. It's not on them on that one. It's just my my measurement, but it just fits in there like a glove, and there's no guessing on where this thing goes, and everything just lines up perfectly. So, tell you what, kit, thought it was fair when I first bought it. Now I think it's an absolute steal for the amount of time it saves, and the instructions and where to measure and how it all goes in. You know, you couldn't make it easier. So Gateway Mustang, awesome part, and I'm basically getting it ready to get all tacked in. I'm just tacking in the piece. You roll the piece back under. They send it with these nice threaded, just like the factory, so when you bolt it in from the bottom, crank it down, it actually pulls this whole plate, squares it all off, and then you can bolt the top plate in, just like I did on this one, and get it all tacked in so it doesn't move around. Then you remove the front Crown Vic subframe here and get it out of the way so you can finish welding it. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. And I just want to kind of show you how it's coming out. But I tell you, this kit makes it incredibly easy, including placing it, finding it, cutting it, putting it in. Crazy. And then behind here, their kit also comes with a boxing plate that will be added to that after I get this box welded in. It's coming along nice. And cannot say, if you're going to be doing this on an older truck, order the Gateway kit, because just the hardware it comes with. Now they say use the original bolts from your Crown Vic so you don't there's a torque to yield, so use the old ones just to mock it back up so you're not doing anything with the brand new bolts. Use the old ones, bolt it in, tack it in, move it out, and once you install it permanently, use the final bolts, the brand new ones they send you. Great kit, making some good progress. I've also mocked up the back, did a spring under. This is the Crown Vic rear axle, cleaned up all the brackets off. I'm going to stick with leaf springs and doing a spring under, just for getting this thing back on the road sooner than later and keeping the budget down. Not to mention, this is going to be my wife's truck, so she's not going to be racing it or anything else. She wants to use it as a truck. So I'm going to keep the rear suspension just factory stock, leaf springs, and then all I've got to do is I'm just going to have to C-notch the frame here so that I have a little more axle clearance, but it really is sitting quite nice. Now what I found is the downside to keeping the Crown Vic axle, and I can see why people throw in a Ford Explorer 8.8 in here, is this is quite a bit wider. It's almost 4 inches too wide for a step side. In fact, it would stick out 2 inches on each side. But that's okay. What we're going to do is I'm going to widen the bed to step side. It currently sat kind of inward of the front body, so it kind of has that, I don't know, hourglassy kind of look, which we didn't like anyway. So we're going to stretch and widen the rear step side by about 6 inches, which will put the wheel arches just beyond these tires, and it'll widen the stance a little bit. I think it'll end up looking better overall, and if I can do a clean job doing it where you don't notice it's been widened, then give it kind of a that doesn't look normal but it looks good type deal. So anyway, there's the progress. Bit more progress, and here we go. This is the box welded in, ground some of the things smooth so that it basically just blends like right into the truck like it's always expected to be there. Now I would recommend watching the Gateway Mustang installation for this thing, and I keep mentioning them just because they've got the best way, and if you use their kit, it's great. They recommend welding a nut on the inside because that will hold the brake lines, and it's the perfect spot. It's where the F-100 had them, and it used to be riveted on, and so if you weld a nut on the inside, after you box it with their boxing plates, you can then just thread your brake lines on, brake brackets. And of course, they come with the boxing plates, and all you've really got to do is massage them a little bit so they fit your frame. So you just have to grind them down a little bit. I bevel the edges, so when I blend this thing right in, I'm going to grind it smooth so you won't see the welds. And then it'll be a box frame from the mounting boxes all the way back almost another 2 feet past that, so that should strengthen the whole frame. And the point is, that's where the I don't know what you want to call those. I guess they're the rear trailing arms on that front suspension are going to be bolted into the bottom of the frame. So this boxing bracket strengthens the whole frame so you don't get any flex. Well thought out. Well, here's part of the instructions. That is rotating the control arms bushings, which I did. They're drying in the back. Frame is boxed. Smoothed out the welds. Looks like one piece. Here's the mounts that they make. This slides right in beautifully, right there. And that's what's beautiful about this kit. I keep raving about it, but got everything you need. So, as soon as I paint the painted little brackets, because I had to grind them off, cut the welds off, rotate it like the instructions say, and painted them so they won't rust. And I've almost got the whole front suspension kit in. Basically about a full day is what it takes. So, yeah, you don't have to grind down the welds. I just did because it makes it kind of look like it's all flush in one piece. Doesn't weaken it because you don't grind down, you know, past where the metal's welded. So, should be perfect.